Ather. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed panelists and distinguished guests, welcome to the panel discussion, Rethinking Security Through Adequate Financing, Advancing Effective Approaches to Tackle Security Threats. Security threats have become increasingly complex and interconnected, demanding robust and sustainable financing strategies to effectively address and mitigate these challenges. This panel seeks to highlight the critical role of transformative potential of feminist foreign policy in shaping more inclusive and equitable security challenges and financing in effectively tackling security threats. My name is Nita Shala. I'm a lawyer and professor of criminal law and transitional justice at the University of Pristina, and I'm honored to be joined today by our esteemed panelists. Ms. Stephanie Foster, co-author of Feminist Foreign Policy in Theory and Practice and partner at SMASH Strategies. Ms. Vera Mieku, legislative policy analyst at the New York City Council. Mr. Radomir Dimic, former journalist and currently head of Multietnika Evropska Perspektiva Kosova, and Dr. Aida Hozic, associate professor of international relations and associate chair of the Department of Political Science, the University of Florida. Before we delve into the discussion, we will hear a short video address from Stacey Abrams, minority leader of Georgia House of Representatives.
A great pleasure to join you today for the second Women, Peace and Security Forum. Congratulations to President Vyosa Osmani for her leadership on this critical issue, to which this forum is a fitting testament. I commend you for taking on the important topic of conflict related to sexual violence and the WPS agenda. This shows an impressive dedication towards women's empowerment and equality. This forum is also a testament to Kosovo's realizing its commitments under President Biden's Democracy Summit. Kosovo's dedication to advancing women in peace and the agenda of security advances the global agenda. I am proud to serve on the board of the National Democratic Institute and greatly value our partnership with Kosovo. I note the late Secretary Madeleine Albright was incredibly proud of our 2 decades of making democracy work. We know that women are at the forefront of facing challenges in times of crises, and that solutions are better and longer lasting when women are at the decision-making table as well. This forum sends a clear message that women are a key pillar of policy and decision-making in fostering strong and resilient democracies. The Women, Peace, and Security agenda is rooted in the concept that decisions related to peace and security are more relevant, informed, and sustainable when they don't ignore the experiences of over 50% of the population. Women must be at the decision-making tables. In my political journey as a leader and a voting rights activist, I have made it my mission to fight for the right to vote because I truly believe that it is only through democratic processes and when all the voices in society are heard that we can all prosper. And when we are all committed to making democracy work, that makes the world a safer, more inclusive place where all members of society can flourish. In this regard, Kosovo is on the cutting edge of progress. It is remarkable that in its last election, Kosovo elected a record 43 members of parliament, 34 of whom were elected without the quota. 5 women serve as ministers, and Kosovo has elected 2 women presidents. This is impressive, but we can't stop there. It is only when women fully and equally participate in all decision-making processes that democracy will deliver for all. As the citizens of Kosovo and other societies emerging from conflict know all too well, women should have central roles in times of peace and conflict, as they are disproportionately affected and they are most able to address their needs. An important contribution to the WPS agenda is the increasing number of states embracing a feminist foreign policy with gender and feminist-informed approaches to their foreign and security policies. We know that states utilizing such approaches have better and longer-lasting outcomes. I am inspired to see that Kosovo understands that elevating democracy and human rights are core principles of democracy, and it makes them a more ethical game player in the international arena. These challenges, however, go beyond gender equality and include intersectionality from all segments and all ethnicities and backgrounds. I congratulate you on this important second forum and the cause of Kosovo and beyond. Thank you for the opportunity to address you, and I wish you all a very successful forum.
Now we go back to our panelists. We begin with Ms. Foster. With a career spanning government and non-for-profit sector and law, you come with deep expertise in economic and political empowerment of women and how to effectively integrate a gender-focused approach into foreign policy. Taking into account the discussions and the non-agreeable definition as to what feminist foreign policy is, could I kindly ask you to clarify us on this issue?
Sure. Can everyone hear okay? Yes? Well, thank you so much, and I'm really happy to be here to talk about this, I think, very transformative topic as we think about ways to ensure that our foreign policy is reflective of the most diverse and inclusive views possible. I would say that one of the reasons that feminist foreign policy is really arisen over the last 10 years is that there is a sense that the traditional foreign policy and national security mechanisms that have governed our world since World War II are less equipped to deal with the world of today than they were with the post-war world. There's a need for a new way, new ways of thinking about foreign policy, and this is one of them. The idea that a feminist foreign policy can help drive change and create a more peaceful, secure, and stable world. So as I said, the first feminist foreign policy was established in 2014 by the Swedish government, by Margot Wallström, the then foreign minister. We're 10 years later, 2024, and 16 countries have had or have a feminist foreign policy, a feminist trade policy, and or a feminist development policy. And also some countries do a kind of an overlay with their women, peace, and security agenda. So this is something that is, I think, a bit of an outgrowth of many things, but the women, peace, and security agenda is certainly foundational to feminist foreign policy as it's practiced around the world. Briefly, I did write a book I co-authored, which I'll show here. I have to do a little ad. But what we found is among these 16 countries, they're very different. The movement for feminist foreign policy started in Sweden and kind of went through the kind of more traditional countries one thinks of when one thinks of gender-focused policy, Norway and other places in Europe, and then Canada. And then in the last probably half of this time, feminist foreign policies have really been established in countries in Latin America, in particular, Colombia, Argentina, and then Mexico, and then now beginning in countries outside of that hemisphere and over into Mongolia and around the world. Some subnational governments have feminist foreign policies as well, and a lot of political parties put this on their agenda as something that they will implement if they're elected to office. So what we found in researching the book is every country is slightly different, but there are 4 major principles that are important to understand what a feminist foreign policy is. And I will quickly go through them. They will be of no surprise to most of you in this room. One is that gender equality is both a strategy and a goal. As we've heard in numerous of the panels throughout this conference and in, I'm sure, all of your work, we know that when countries are more gender equal, they're more prosperous, they're more stable, and they tend to be countries that engage less in conflict and are more engaged in the international kind of decision-making processes in terms of treaties and treaty implementation. So basically, while gender equality is, as Secretary Clinton always used to say, the right thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do. Gender equality as a strategy and a goal is the first principle that cuts across all the countries with a feminist foreign policy. The second, which I love this, is to expand the definition of security. Here we have rethinking security. As we know, traditional security, in the words of a very well-known American ambassador. It's always been the thought is about men with guns, talking to other men with guns about how to ensure that they get immunity for what they did with their guns or weapons. That is not security anymore. Security is looking at things like food security, health security, climate crisis, climate security related crises, all the things that are really human security. And there is, of course, a movement around human security. But the second thing that feminist foreign policies focus on is that, to look at security in a broader way, so that it's not just about a military response to everything. It's about looking at how we can build stronger and more resilient societies across all of those areas. The third thing, again, no surprise, it's about bringing more diverse voices into foreign policy and national security decision-making. And that's in two ways. One is at the diplomatic level, more women in high-level positions, whether they're elected, whether they're appointed, more women heading up ministries, more women elected to be presidents of countries, more women in parliaments, more women generals, more women admirals. You know, that is important. But also, bringing in diverse voices for countries with feminist foreign policies mean they bring in civil society voices, voices of people who are affected by the policies that those countries are implementing. And that's, I think, a central tenet of this conference. The fourth is a shift in power between defense diplomacy and development. I say this as an American. We don't have a feminist foreign policy, but we certainly are a country where we put inordinate amounts of funding towards defense. And we do need to put money towards the defense of our country. But we do need to think about how we shift that money, some of that money, over towards development and diplomacy so that we don't have to engage as much in conflict around the world. And that is true across the countries that have feminist foreign policies. That is the goal of theirs, is to shift the power balance between diplomacy, defense, and development. And I'll just end by saying, I mean, critical to all of this, and I think important as we have this conversation about financing, is that political will is critical. Money is a reflection of political will. Financing and how we think about rethinking our institutions, where we put our resources, it's all a reflection of political will. We look at the money, but really what we're looking at is how you, as a government, how policymakers decide to spend that money. So I think that's extremely critical in this conversation. The last thing I want to say on that is that it's also important that we build into all the decision-making that the papers, the briefs, all the things that we give to policymakers around the world. We really need to start thinking about ensuring there's a gender analysis in those policies, because that can drive us to looking at how we spend resources if we understand the differential impact of those policy decisions on men and women, boys and girls, and other diverse parts of the population. So very briefly, that's kind of a landscape of what we found in researching the book. Again, there are countries that do many different things. Colombia, I will just say, is the only country with a feminist foreign policy that says it's pacifist. Other countries will say definitely they're not pacifist in their feminist foreign policy. So again, we looked at what we could find that was common, and those were the 4 principles we came up with.
Many thanks, Ms. Foster. Just a follow-up question. As a practitioner, what strategies do you recommend for advocating on the adoption of and implementation also of feminist foreign policy strategies at the local level, but also at the international level?
I mean, I think a lot of it is how do we build into the daily lives of the people who are briefing our policymakers, right? Political will is up here, right? You have to have that political will. But the people who are responsible, like many of us who've worked at government ministries, you're responsible for briefing your policymaker about a decision. We need to ensure that as those decisions are being briefed and discussed, that there's a very strong gender analysis. As decisions are made about resources and money, that we're looking at gender budgeting, that we're really trying to build in to these systems things that drive this kind of transformative change. Feminist foreign policy is not about women. It's about driving a policy that's good for everyone, because we know that when women are engaged, that policies that countries are more prosperous, secure, and stable. So it's about building in systems that, as I say, you know, when you walk into the ministry of the foreign ministry, the defense ministry, the State Department, wherever you walk in, you turn on your computer, there's something that you know you have to do before you actually put a paper out for a decision, and that's doing a gender analysis, advocating for gender advisors, ensuring you have sex disaggregated data, which I know seems very basic, but trust me, as someone who just spent a year and a half working on Afghan relocation at the State Department, getting sex disaggregated data on who was coming to the United States from Afghanistan was actually kind of hard, which seemed shocking to me. So I think those are the kind of very specific things that then can help drive every decision that gets made about money and financing, whether it's at the international level or the national level or the state level. Because really now, and we've heard this again so many times, you know, there are set-aside funds for women, peace, and security, for all these things, but that's a very small amount of money. We need to make sure that when the big decisions are made about large amounts of money, which is what we all count on in the international systems, that there are systems in place that address the gender differential impact of how that money is spent.
Many thanks, Ms. Foster. Now we move on to our next panelist, Ms. Vera Mieko. You are an experienced government professional in the U.S. with 25 years of experience in management, policy and data analysis, legislation, communication, elections, advocacy, human rights, and public diplomacy. We'd like to know more as to how can local government and legislative bodies like the New York City Council contribute to advancing feminist principles and agendas.
Thank you very much, Nita, and thank you to all the panelists. I would also like to thank President Osmani for this amazing initiative, also making Kosovo center stage of women, peace, and security in Western Balkans and also in Europe. I would like to go a little further. I really appreciate Stephanie's take, but the saga of women underrepresentation in government is really long, and I don't think it's a federal issue. I don't think it's a state issue or a local issue. It goes back into our families, our communities, our neighborhoods, and that's where it really starts. Only 100 years ago, in the United States, the women had no right to vote and no right to representation, and it took a lot of efforts. And despite a long fight, the numbers, and I'm going to quote some numbers, despite making up to 51% of the population and 60% of the votes, according to the Center for American Women in Politics at Rutgers, only in 2023, women held about 28% of seats in Congress, about 25% of seats in the U.S. Senate, and at the local level, the representation is about 25% of the major cities. I'm proud to work for the New York City local administration, one of the biggest administrations in the world with one of the biggest budgets, about $107 billion. And after many years and many efforts, I was proud to witness in 2021 that New York City became the first major city in the United States to achieve gender parity in representation. And in the legislature, with the election of 31 women out of a body of 51 members. And under the leadership of a woman speaker, who is also an African American, women also now chair about 70% of the committees, which is about 25 of the 36 committees. The importance of the first women majority council is not only about the pink blazers and the purple blazers in the background. It goes further. They tackle many issues that were overlooked in the past by creating policies that benefit many historically marginalized communities, underrepresented communities, addressing matters of equity, opportunity, healthcare. And I'm going to give some examples of how this body changed policies and legislature, and why is it important to help electing women representatives. Within just the first year of the majority, the council prioritized child health care. It was never done before. An example is the pre-K, which is, it started at 3 years old and gave working mothers a big boost. Also passing a package of 8 child care bills designed to expand access for working mothers and families, and also advance professional opportunities for a lot of professional women. Moreover, the council enacted the historic New York City Abortion Rights Act, which is, it has about 12 pieces of legislation that safeguard and expand access to abortion and reproductive health care. I also was sharing with Nita a little bit earlier that, you know, we've gone as far as passing or asking to pass a bill to pay for fertility treatments, you know, which is an amazing thing, and it's an issue for a lot of young families. Also, to advance community education, there was a fund of about $4.4 million that was given to bring back about 10,000 working-age students and women who had not finished their studies, and giving them the opportunity to follow up. We also passed supporting the survivors package, which is a very important package that requires a lot of the city agencies to establish a housing stability grant, also an assistance program to create an online portal and resource guide, and also allocating resources for women of domestic violence. And the majority in New York City Council has shown that when women lead, their constituents are happier. Women lead with more proactive approaches. They're better coordinated at policy responses. They work to serve historically marginalized and underrepresented communities at more detail than men do. And they work faster, they work better in a team, they make bold investments and legislate in issues that do not only focus in women, and this is very important, but issues that concern everyone, such as health, safety, education, domestic violence, family policies, and others. So I think New York City is at a center stage for proving that all these women-based agenda does work if we have women representative communities. And I think it's an amazing example of representation.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to make to you a follow-up question, and it's related to your experience in communication, but also in your active engagement of the Albanian diaspora in the United States. How does networking and supporting women causes and women-led initiative helps advance the feminist agenda?
Well, thank you for that question. I'm a firm believer that women supporting women is the key to advancing women issues. I also do believe that women networking and supporting causes for each other, you know, it makes a big difference. I wanted to share 2 causes that I personally work on, apart from my work in legislature and in city council. I do believe that we raise by lifting others, and I have been part of an amazing mentorship program sponsored by the National Endowment Institute and Gurmin, a local organization in Kosovo, on mentoring women in politics in local government. It's been an amazing program. We both coach women that want to run for office and current assemblywomen. We finished the first year of the program, and now we had recommendations for the second year, and it has shown progress, and it's one of those initiatives that I love to come back to Pristina. The mentorship program is a monthly program. We meet them online. They usually have questions on all aspects of campaigns, from fundraising to communications, social media, how to prepare for a campaign, and then working in government, how to secure budgets, how to work on pieces of legislation, how to organize in women caucuses. And this is one of the recommendations we've had. I don't see a lot of the women caucuses working together. Local government works differently in Kosovo than in the United States. At the end of the second year, we might also give some recommendations that might change the way how governments help. And this is in terms of funding. I'm going to give an example. A council member in New York City has a budget of about $5 million, and that's discretionary funding. And an assemblywoman or man here has zero funding. So that goes to say that, at the end of the day, when they rerun for office, they haven't had much to do with their constituencies in terms of funding. So that's something that we're trying to see if it can work. The National Endowment and Gurmin are allocating some small lumps of funding to see how we can try it out in Pristina. In Kosovo. Actually, the women I work with are from the municipality of Istog. And they're great women, and it's amazing to work with them. The second initiative I have embraced is advocating for the survivors of sexual war crimes. I'm the co-leader of Rally for Her Justice, a movement to raise awareness. And I'm also the co-writer of Resolution 36 in U.S. Congress, a resolution in the name of Vaspija Krasniqi-Goodman, which has been introduced by Congressman Colin Allred. We've done great work with her. She's an amazing role model and advocates for about 20,000 women and men that were raped during the war in Kosovo. And we're hoping that we will send this resolution to U.S. Senate. And there is very interesting points that pertain to survivors and justice in the resolution. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share this, and it's been a real pleasure to be on this panel.
Thank you. Thank you. As a matter of fact, sexual violence in conflict is a threat to international peace and security. And our next panelist, Mr. Dimic, is a former journalist and also a leader of the non-for-profit working in Kosovo and the region. I'd like to hear from Mr. Dimic with regards to the situation in Serbia and also in the Western Balkans as to the topic of sexual violence in conflict, and also basically crimes committed where women are used as a weapon of war.
Hvala vam na datoj reči. Želim da se naravno zahvalim predsjednici Vjosi Osmani koja nam je uputila poziv da dođem iz Beograda i da budem deo ovog panela. Pozdravljam sve kolege. Pa evo ovako, ja bih se osvrnuo, i juče se govorilo o tome, koliko je zločina bilo i nasilja seksualnog, dakle, tokom rata na Kosovu, i čini mi se da sam negde dobro pročitao broj da je bilo to negde oko 8.000 žena. Međutim, na drugoj strani, što je veoma tragično, ljudi se bave brojkama i stigo je demanti iz Kancelarije za Kosovo, zvaničnog, dakle, službenika iz Beograda, da je taj broj nije 8.000, nego je, zamislite, samo 1.000. Zaista to je jedno užasno posmatranje ovog problema s aspekta srpske strane. Pogotovo ako se zna da su ti zločini odnosno dakle, žrtve seksualnog nasilja na Kosovu tokom rata kvalifikujem kao ratne zločine i nikako drugačije. Ne može se reći samo 1000 žena, makar da je bilo i 10 žena, to je tragedija velikih razmera. O ovoj tragediji se ćuti još uvek u Beogradu, ova tema uopšte nije načeta. Dakle, šta radi pravna država? Šta rade pravni mehanizmi? Šta rade pravosudni organi? Da li je samo jedan čovjek uzurpirao vlast u svoje ruke i ako on ne kaže, ne smete to osuditi, neće se osuditi. Znate, ako ja ovde nisam došao da napadam režim u Beogradu, niti državu Srbiju, ja sam došao da govorim u ime moje dece. Zamislite da su to naše majke, naše sestre, naše ćerke. Kako bi reagovala Srbija? Koliko bi to bilo rezolucija poslato, oslato u Njujorku, Ujedinjenim nacijama na Savetu bezbednosti? Dakle, ja se stvarno zgražavam nad ovom činjenicom da još niko nije javno progovorio o ovoj velikoj sramoti, tragediji, o čudovištima, molim vas, o čudovištima koji se slobodno šetaju po Beogradu. Ovo je akt varvarizma i divljaštva. Šta rade mediji u Srbiji i Beogradu? Jesu li oni reagovali? Pa nisu. A zašto nisu? Pa zato što svu kontrolu nad medijima ima samo jedan čovjek i režim Aleksandra Vučića. U tom kontekstu treba posmatrati normalizaciju odnosa Kosova i Srbije, zvanične Prištine i Beograda. Zbog čega dijalog nije odmakao? Zato što se vodi jedna ambivalentna politika. Hoću, neću. Tako i sa ovom tragedijom. Dakle, ja ovo moram da kažem i u ime moje dece, jer ne želim da nose žig ove prljavštine, ovog divljaštva. Iskreno da vam kažem, kad dolazići ovde da govorim o ovoj temi, meni je jako teško bilo da se opredelim, a da ne kažem da je ovo i zločin na neki način režima koji je zataškavao sve ovo, da se o ovome ništa ne čuje, da se ne progovori. Kao što je to bio slučaj i sa masovnom grobnicom u Batajnici. Pa se setite, molim vas, i onog kamiona potopljenom u Dunavu, za koji nismo znali, pun ubijenih ljudi dopremljeni sa Kosova. Dakle, to je zaista jedno pitanje. Ja mislim da je svrha ove konferencije da se pošalje poruka Beogradu da mora da poštuje evropske zakone ukoliko želi u Evropu. Slušao sam pažljivo koleginice koje su pričale o toj rodnoj ravnopravnosti itd. itd. Ja bih još malo, ako dozvolite, može li? Još samo jedna rečenica, dve. Vidite, ajde da vidimo na severu Kosova. Imamo 4 opštine, je li tako? Koliko tamo žena srpske nacionalnosti je uključeno u politički život tih opština? Tamo vlada srpska militantna lista. I oni se pitaju za sve. Oni se pitaju i o tome da li će se progovoriti o ovom neviđenom zločinu tokom rata koje je urađeno ženama na Kosovu. Oni se pitaju koliko će žena biti tamo i da li će biti. Ako su samo podobne prema instrukcijama iz Beograda i ako pripadaju Srpskoj naprednoj stranci, one će prosperirati. Oni će otići. Ono što je dobro je da sam čuo ovde da je broj žena albanske nacionalnosti, dakle, u sve većem i većem broju zastupljen u organima vlasti, u institucijama, u ministarstvima, vojsci i tako dalje. Gde su žene srpske nacionalnosti? Ko to njima brani? Ba brani im zvanična politika, jedna morbidna politika iz Beograda. Oprostite što sam možda odužio malo.
Thank you very, very much. As a matter of fact, being in denial from, in terms of the governmental response, and understanding that potentially media are under the control of the government, is there anything that other stakeholders can do in terms of bringing these individuals, these criminals, to accountability, or increasing the discussion about sexual violence in conflict in the public arena?
Kako progovoriti, molim vas? Evo ja danas rizikujem da budem proglašen izdajnikom srpskog naroda. Zato što govorim o ovoj temi. Ja sam već targetiran. Ja se godinama targetiram kao Radomir Dimić koji je i 2008. ukazao na mnoge stvari koje su urađene ovde na Kosovu. Da smo imali jedan diktatorski režim Slobodana Miloševića, koji je najveća tragedija ne samo albanskog, nego i srpskog naroda. Ja ne znam već koliko danas ću dobiti etiketu denuncijanta, cinkaroša, da sam došao ovde da cinkarim sopstvenu državu, tobože. Ali država je Aleksandar Vučić. Ako nešto kritikujem, onda sam ja kritikovao državu Srbiju. Hoću da kažem da postoji strah. Strah da se bilo šta kaže. Nešto što nije u skladu sa razmišljenjem, ličnim razmišljenjem ili insuficijencijom Aleksandra Vučića, mentalnom insuficijencijom. Dakle, ja neću da budem ja neću da radim po diktatu Aleksandra Vučića, niti politike iz Beograda. Ja nisam vazal Srpske napredne stranke. Ja sam slobodan čovek, hoću da slobodno razmišljam i hoću da podržim vladu Republike Kosova. Moja patrija je moje selo gde se rodio. Moja država je Kosovo. Ja drugu državu nemam. Oprostite, opet što sam malo temperamentnije govorio ono što treba.
Mr. Dimić, thank you so much for your contribution, but also your work in speaking truth to power, basically, with regards to this very crucial and sensitive topic. I think it might be reasonable to move on to Professor Hozic and hear from her perspective with regards to literature. What does academia say about, taking into account your background in intercultural studies and in community studies, as studies in the Western Balkans, what can be done in terms of addressing these sensitive topics and also pushing forward these sensitive agendas, recognizing the powers, the blocking powers that exist in some of these settings?
Thank you, Nita, very much. Thank you for your questions, for moderating, and I also would like to take the opportunity to thank President Osmani for inviting us here. I also want to thank my home country now, United States, and the U.S. government actually for supporting this initiative and for putting putting itself behind the WPS agenda, which frankly we don't always notice within the United States as much. So I'm very glad that this is one of the projections of the U.S. power now in Western Balkans. I'll try to tie some of these things which seem perhaps unrelated: feminist foreign policy, local politics, sexually abused bodies, with two additional kind of statements about what feminist political economy and feminist security studies may bring to our understandings of war and peace. And I think the first one, which many feminist authors have already argued for years, is that when we are thinking about wars, we should not be thinking about them as isolated events. We should be really thinking about continuums of violence, which go from domestic violence to organized violence of wars, and then backwards, once again, to domestic violence and to femicides, which we are witnessing now in Western Balkans, particularly acutely. The other dimension of and the intersection of feminist political economy and feminist security studies is that wars are also neither spatially, they're not spatially isolated events. They usually take place in wider contexts and through different flows, usually of bodies and of money. They're actually integrated in broader regional but also global political economy. And once again, I think this is something that over the last few decades we have acutely witnessed here in the Western Balkans. And so from these two perspectives, we're kind of thinking about wars as being neither spatially nor temporally, isolated and located. We can also try to understand why, by following monies and following body, we can see a very different gendered landscape than the one which is imagined if we approach it only from the perspective of states. So if we consider this, what I would like to highlight today are some of these structural political economy, I think, impediments to resolution of problems of justice, but also to advancement of women in both the formal labor markets and in terms of political participation. The example of New York City is the counterexample. We can see actually how much can be achieved when money is in the right place and when women are actually participating broadly. Serbia is probably the other extreme. So we are very fortunate, I think, that we live with many unfortunate events in contemporary global politics. That many advancements have actually been made over the last 2 decades, 2.5 decades, since the beginnings of the implementation of WPS agenda, including in the sphere of economy and by international financial institutions, which for a very long time completely neglected any kind of gender dimensions. And so Stephanie has already mentioned, for instance, gender budgeting, which is a kind of a very technical, boring tool. It requires a lot of retraining by people who try to implement it, but can be very helpful in redistribution of resources in such a way that if they don't advance the position of women, at least that they don't additionally hurt them. But the way the gender budgeting is currently being implemented also shows where the limits, I think, of our thinking about kind of gender in policy terms may rest. And so I would like to highlight 3 of these potential limits. The first one is kind of implementation, training, the willingness of people who are actually engaged in policy making to put them to work. The second one is knowledge. Economics, in particular, is still very much a male-dominated discipline, and we have a kind of a lack, even in the United States, of economists who are trained to understand issues which relate to gender. Gender budgeting, for instance, its introduction in the International Monetary Fund was really due to a handful of women economists who basically in the 1990s, late 1990s, said, we want to push this gender budgeting agenda. And they were told, fine, if you want to do it, you do it on your own time. And they actually did it. They put their own volunteer work in kind of crafting policies, pushing for it, and then during the kind of leadership of Madame Lagarde, they came much more to fruition than they did before. But the third aspect is the one of investment. And here we have to think about the way in which investments usually flow to conflict and post-conflict areas. And just as Stephanie was mentioning, we usually think about security in terms of men with guns. So when the investments come to these really kind of ravaged areas, post-war areas, they usually tend to flow towards security sector, hardcore security sector, and they go towards infrastructure, which gets destroyed during the war. Both of these sectors tend to be male-dominated. At the same time, the sectors in which women dwell, such as care industries or economies of care, broadly understood childcare, education, healthcare, senior care, nearly 3/4 of the world kind of workforce in care industries are women, get underfunded. And the peculiar effects of that underfunding, depletion of care industries here in Western Balkans are, I think, now the most crucial impediment to greater gender equality in the region. We are also tied to global flows of care workers and regional care workers. And so there's a double kind of indemnity here, that on the one hand, these sectors are underfunded in the region, and at the same time, Europe has tremendous demand for care workers. So just to give you one figure, since 2013, Germany has imported about 200,000 care workers, nurses in particular. 17.3% of those 200 nurses came from Western Balkans, and they represented a third of nurses employed in the region. So in the last 10 years, we have lost a third of nurses in the Western Balkans. As a result, because it's mostly women who do this care work, who now have to do it informally and compensate for these losses, our labor participation, women labor participation in Western Balkans is approximately at 25%. It depends from one kind of state to another, which is incredibly, incredibly low. So my little pitch here would be, yes, let's increase women political participation. Let's have more women in power. But let's also kind of follow the money and put the money into those places where women work, because that would help us reach kind of more equitable gendered environments.
Thank you. Just following up on that, what about the role of universities and the role of academia? Would it be helpful also to think about centering or directing the budgeting towards academia in order to also delve to have more grounded research on these topics, and that research would eventually lead into more evidence-based policy making with regards to security and peace?
No, that's precisely the kind of lacuna. We heard at one of the previous panels about the work at Georgetown of their WPS Center and the way in which kind of their evidence-based research is helping in kind of propagating the WPS policies. We have, I mean, universities are, once again, and education are part of these underfunded industries where, again, there's, in some areas, like in Western Balkans, again, majority of professors are women, and so these have become very feminized sectors which are now losing state support. They're massively privatized in the rest of the world. And we also are short on knowledge, because there is as Stephanie and I were talking, there's a tremendous kind of fear. When you say gender, there are all of these anti-gender politics now all over the world. If you say feminist, people are terrified of the F word. But we really need more knowledge about kind of gender dimensions and gender aspects of our entire kind of, once again, environments dwelling, in order to be able to reach that equity that we desire, and more stable, more sustainable peace, more stable world. Thank you, Nita.
Thank you so much. And I think with that, we basically conclude this panel discussion. It has been an honor to moderate it. Thank you so much, Ms. Foster. Thank you, Ms. Mieku, Mr. Dimic, and Dr. Hazic. Amazing. I think they deserve a round of applause for all their amazing contributions. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much.